That's what it sounded like on the weekend in Ottawa as the mass protests by truckers and those opposed to mandatory vaccine passports reached the Canadian capital. And while the Freedom Convoy was initially to be about getting the Trudeau government to lift a new rule requiring truckers to be vaccinated when they come back into Canada or go into quarantine, just as a similar rule exists now in the U.S., many who have joined the convoy from BC to Ottawa are also protesting other restrictions on personal freedoms after 2 years of the COVID pandemic. Parts of Canada's Jewish community agree with this stance. However, that goodwill certainly took a pause on the weekend when scenes emerged of a swastika flag in the convoy, and there were other racist flags too, and many Canadians were deeply offended and outraged by scenes of trucks parked on the National War Memorial, protesters dancing on the grave of the unknown soldier, and the Terry Fox statue draped with banners and slogans. The main spokesperson for the truckers is Benjamin Dichter. He's a Jewish activist from Toronto. On Sunday at a news conference, he brushed off a question about the swastika when he was asked about it.
So I go to CJN. These are the leaders of my community. They're pathetic. They really are. They're what's fueling anti-Semitism in Canada. Because somebody pulls up some random, we call it the hoax hate. You hear this hoax hate all the time. Oh, somebody painted a swastika on a trash can. It's backwards. Right? So they're clearly not committed to the cause, right? Yeah, people troll, do stupid things, whatever. Right. Who cares? But what do? Anytime you see something like that, the leaders of that community, they're outraged. This is disgusting. And for the rest of us, it's fueling the hate towards the rest of us. So ignore it.
I'm Ellen Besner, and this is what Jewish Canada sounds like for Monday, January the 31st, 2022. Welcome to the CJN Daily, sponsored by Metropia. From CJA to Friends of Simon Wiesenthal Canada, generals and veterans, rabbis and members of parliament, there was a lot of condemnation this weekend for the swastika flag and other events linked to the truckers' protest in Ottawa. Coming up, we'll hear from Melissa Lantsman. She's a Conservative MP for Thornhill. She's also the party's shadow critic for transportation. We'll also hear from the head of Ottawa's Jewish Federation, Andrea Freedman, about how local Jewish people in the capital are watching the events unfold. But first, here's more about what we know about Benjamin Dichter, the chief spokesperson for the Freedom Convoy. The audio of his came from a news conference Sunday, which was given at an undisclosed location to which mainstream media were not invited, and it was live-streamed by a right-wing media outlet from Alberta. Dichter himself now runs a podcast network called Possibly Correct, which hosts right-wing and conservative shows. And in previous years, he founded a group for LGBTQ members of the Federal Conservative Party. And he also ran for the Tories in the 2015 federal election in Toronto Danforth, but lost. He once helped found a local chapter of Cherut in Toronto. It's a right-wing Israeli movement. And in 2017, he spoke at a conference run by some Jewish groups where he complained about Muslim law possibly taking over Canadian society. We reached out to him for an interview for the CJN Daily, which will bring you if and when we get one.
I'm Michael Levine in Toronto, Canada, and this is what Jewish Canada sounds like.
And Melissa Lantsman joins me from her Toronto home just ahead of Monday's resumption of Parliament. And what were you watching this weekend?
Well, I didn't attend the convoy, so I should be. I don't have a first. I don't have a sort of an on the ground glance to it, but like you and many people who have been looking at this over the weekend, you watch different feeds and news, and I have the benefit of speaking to a lot of the organizations that I'd made contact with on this issue because they've spoken to this issue. We've seen folks like the Canadian manufacturers and the CFIB, which is the small business group, the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, all raise some concern about the timing of this mandate. So I've been following a lot of that, and I will say, I think like everybody else in this country, I do support the right to protest, and I think it's a fundamental right in our democracy. No matter how much some disagree with the actual intention of the convoy and its purpose.
But as you for sure tweeted about, there were problematic flags and problematic, symbols and behavior. So as a person who represents a riding with a lot of Holocaust survivors and their children and second and third generation, how did this feel when you learned about that?
Yeah, look, certainly. It's possible to respect the people's right to protest, even if you think they're wrong, while condemning the reprehensible, I think, symbols and language used by a number of people who I believe have co-opted that protest. Nazi flags are always wrong. Confederate flags are always wrong. Desecration of monuments and national heroes are always wrong. And I think particularly coming from where I come from, the family that I come from, the riding that I represent, and all of the advocacy that I've done through my life and my legislative goals in the future, I think it was particularly difficult to watch. The protest, the most pure form of hatred symbolized by the swastika. It represents for me sort of the darkest moments in history, and seeing it being waved on Parliament Hill is distressing, as it is always distressing seeing it in our neighborhoods. And what I will say to that is I think those individuals need to be held accountable, and we've spoken about this before. Those individuals need to be arrested and charged. And unfortunately, we won't see that. And time and time again, we don't see that. We saw Nazi flags at protests in our own city with the Palestinians' support. We've seen Hezbollah flags in the streets of Montreal. This is a listed terrorist organization. But we see these symbols, and we haven't seen, unfortunately, the powerful deterrents that are needed for these individuals to be held individually responsible, so that there is an example of bad actors, and we can see a deterrent and see these reprehensible symbols that they choose to embrace be condemned and legal action taken against this. We don't see that, and some would argue that those laws exist, but without any consequences and without any action, this happens again and again and again.
So, Monday morning, what should happen in Parliament?
We can absolutely separate the two, because I think it's also dangerous to dismiss the growing frustration, which is the crux of this protest of selective mandates, continued restrictions. We are 2 years into this with a 90% vaccinated population, and we are still doing a lot of the same things that we were doing a year ago, and a lot of the same things that we were doing 2 years ago, and dismissing all of that as these are a bunch of white supremacists not wanting to get vaccinated, I think is an equally dangerous road. So the path forward is a very difficult one for, I think, all politicians, to be able to distance themselves from the terrible elements that exist within that group, and to understand that our friends, our neighbors, our moms and our dads and everybody in between feel this incredible frustration now, where we are living in a way that when you just said you were in Florida, or when you look to the UK or Denmark, they are no longer doing. So there needs to be an explanation for this. And I think ignoring this protest is to your own peril.
And joining me now from Ottawa is the CEO of the city's Jewish Federation, Andrea Freedman. Ottawa's seen lots of protests before. This is a large one with wheels. But when it veered into Nazi flags desecrating the sacred monuments of the National War Monument, and the timing, which was 2 days after Holocaust Remembrance Day, that's when things changed for the Jewish community. What was that change like for you?
It was complete, and it was devastating change. So, if we go back in time 48 hours, I was at the National Holocaust Monument along with many other people, including a Holocaust survivor. It was a beautiful ceremony and a beautiful commemoration of the liberation of Auschwitz. And then to go 48 hours later where, literally Nazi flags are feet from where the Holocaust monument is devastating and it's upsetting. But I'll be honest with you, there's always going to be haters in the world. Anti-Semitism isn't new, and there will always be people who espouse these horrific ideologies, but they need to be at the fringe of society. And what you see in protests like this is when the Nazi flag is present, when the Confederate flag is present, and the people around them don't do or say anything, that's the really scary part. The fact that, really anti-Semitic organizations are wearing jackets at these rallies, that they feel emboldened and they feel safe to do that in our nation's capital is appalling. And that's what needs to change. Society's attitude towards this hatred is what needs to change.
And that's what Jewish Canada sounds like for this episode of the CJN Daily, sponsored by Metropia. Integrity, community, quality, and customer care. Today's listener shout-out goes to the family of the late Jewish war veteran Marvin Gord, who died Friday at the age of 101. Gord was in the Air Force overseas during the Second World War, and he became famous during the pandemic when, for his 100th birthday, he walked 1 million steps to raise money for Baycrest Hospital in Toronto. Our sincerest condolences, especially to our podcast listeners, Lisa Hemme, and to his good friend, Rafi Yablonsky. And we'll end the episode with a nod to the thousands of Canadians in Florida who are wondering if maybe they're better off at home. It's been so cold there these last 2 days, the coldest in a decade, that iguanas are literally falling out of trees too frozen to move. As this TV reporter showed on TV in Florida on Sunday, when they talked about wind chills with temperatures going down to 4 Celsius Monday night in Deerfield Beach.
And when we talk about cold-studded iguanas, it has to get below 50 for them to start feeling sluggish. When it gets below 45, that's when they start to freeze up, and that is exactly what we're seeing here this morning. And iguanas in the trees, so they go in the trees overnight to usually sleep. And so when they're there overnight, that's when the temperatures start to fall. The perfect recipe, so they're up there sleeping, the next thing they know, they can't feel their body, they're hanging on, they're thinking, what's going on? The next thing they know, they're on the ground. So that is what we're finding here this morning.